Today, I have a wonderful guest. She is author Eve Brown-Waite, who will talk about her book, First Comes Love, Then Comes Malaria, How a Peace Corps Poster Boy Won My Heart and a Third World Adventure Changed My Life. It's from Broadway Books, and it's her first book. While Eve spent years in Ecuador, Uganda, and Uzbekistan, this book covers her time in Ecuador and Uganda. Eve has a master's in public health and is currently health and nutrition manager for a Head Start program. Eve, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for spending time with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is my absolute pleasure to be talking to you.
Well, this was such a wonderful book, and especially being a first book, but you had lots of experiences to work with, and it's just filled with those wonderful things. I'd like to begin, Eve, by telling my audience that 10% of your royalties will go to care for malaria prevention. Mm-hmm. Now, you yourself contracted malaria in Africa. And tell us a bit about that, and what number of Africans die from the disease, malaria?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, the book is funny, and I don't make fun of malaria at all, but the book is funny, and I do want to say malaria is not a funny disease, and I don't mean to be making fun of it. It can be quite serious. When I got it, when my husband got it, lots of people who have access to health care and money, if we get it, we can usually be cured, no problem. But that is not the case for a lot of people, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And about 1 million people die every year in sub-Saharan Africa from malaria. Most of them are children under 5. And for that reason, and the thing is, malaria is a preventable disease as well as a treatable disease if people have access to care and the appropriate medications and precautions. And so that's why 10% of my royalties are going to CARE International, and they're going to use the money for malaria prevention.
Well, that's absolutely incredible, and I congratulate you on that. Well, let's get into talking about the book, because it is funny, but there are some frightening experiences and some sad experiences. But let's go back to the beginning. Is it an understatement to say that even though you did want to join the Peace Corps, you were a little bit ambivalent about it until you met and fell for the recruiter John, who's now your husband?
Yes. I don't think that's an understatement at all. I was definitely ambivalent. I think probably a lot of people going into the Peace Corps are at least a little bit ambivalent. I mean, you're going to be in some tough conditions. You may not know what you're getting into. You're leaving everything familiar behind. So I think I think if you're not ambivalent, you're really not paying attention.
Uh-huh.
So I was certainly ambivalent, but you're right. I walked into my interview, and within an hour, I was head over heels in love with my recruiter. And that was the end of the ambivalence, because if you want to win the heart of a Peace Corps recruiter, you'd better follow through on your Peace Corps commitment.
Well, so yes.
Yeah.
And you did go into service, but you did cry all the way to Ecuador, your assigned station, where with only a few words of Spanish, you end up working with street people, street children, I'm sorry. What skills did you have to prepare you for this?
Well, I had been a camp counselor. I don't think I was all that well. I mean, I had an undergraduate degree in political science, which isn't really helpful. And I had worked as a camp counselor for a number of years. And, I had worked at a rape crisis center. But again, I wasn't particularly well prepared to work with these kids. Peace Corps trained us for 3 months, and then they kind of said, good luck.
Well,
Buena suerte.
John saw something in you, though, when he was asking you about your background, and he felt with a few of the things that you have done that you actually had some skills in sewing, and that's an important skill for when you're in a third world country. And he just felt that now maybe he kind of fell for you a little bit too, but it sounded like it was pretty businesslike in the interview, and he felt that you could handle this. So there you were. You went off working with the street kids, and that's quite an aspect of the book. and these kids you really grew fond of. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a really intense experience, and I think most people who go into the Peace Corps, a very common part of the experience is frustration, because you get there, and even if the agency has a job for you, it's usually very fuzzy. As Americans, we're very forward-thinking, we're very achievement-oriented, and then you get to some of these third-world countries, and things don't move that quickly, and nobody really knows what to do with you, and you may not have a job as we as Americans consider a job, 9 to 5, you go someplace, you do something. So there's a lot of frustration and a lot of time spent trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. And that was the case with me. And it took more than a few months. I would say it took probably about 5 or 6 months before I finally figured out what my purpose could be. And that was taking these kids, these boys, these homeless boys, and doing some basic intake with them, finding out about the families they had come from, where they were, how they had gotten separated from their families, whether or not they wanted to go home, to be reconnected with their families, and then in some cases to actually reunite these boys with their parents.
And that part of the story was really something, and
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too much about that because we want people to get the book and read it because it's such a wonderful read with so many details. So we'll go on and go on to the next point, that after finishing a year, you were forced to return home because of a traumatic event that happened to a friend which greatly affected you. And again, we won't give all of that away, but how did you feel about leaving?
Leaving Ecuador for me was, in itself, it was traumatic. I left very quickly. I was medically evacuated. When I left, I thought I was coming back. I didn't have my things with me. I didn't say goodbye. And once I was back in Washington on medevac, it was decided I couldn't go back. And I was a mess. I was a mess. There's no other way to describe it.
Yes.
I was an absolute mess.
And that was a very sad part of the book,
Yeah.
and I felt badly for you as well. How did this affect your relationship with John, your coming back?
I thought I would lose him. I really didn't. I thought that if I was not a successful Peace Corps volunteer, if I wasn't strong and go get him, that he wouldn't want to be with me. So that part was hard too.
Yes, but eventually all of that changed, and but here you are, you're at home, and you had as much trouble as many expats do readjusting to life in America as you did adjusting to Ecuador. However, you did decide to go on and get your graduate degree in public health. And you and John finally married. I was so happy when I read that.
You, me, my mother, everybody was happy.
Well, but here you are, you're married, but before you know it, you're both off to Uganda, where John had a 2-year contract with CARE, the humanitarian organization, and he was heading over as a manager of a savings and loan project in the small community of Arua. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you got it right. Arua,
Uganda. Well, tell our audience, give a description of what you found upon your arrival.
What did I find when we got to Arua?
Well,
500 miles of dirt road. No, 500 kilometers of dirt road. We were 500 kilometers away from the capital city. We were in a town where there was no electricity. There was no running water, no telephone service. I mean, really, not a lot of infrastructure. And I had thought, well, if we got to Uganda, I could do some work because, as you said before, I have a master's in public health. And I was doing, specializing in AIDS education. And I thought, brilliant, I'll have plenty of work in Uganda. But we were so far out and so far up in the bush that nobody was doing anything up there. So what I found in a nutshell was a lot of frustration.
But the one thing that I found charming was when you did arrive in the airport and you were greeted by an individual. Was that Adam?
That's Adam.
Yes. And I loved his way of talking with you by asking you a question. But he was so charming and so sweet. And but it was still, I know, a bit confusing for you at that point.
Yeah. It's
So,
always confusing in the beginning, yeah.
well, I wonder why.
Because everything just seems so backwards and upside
Absolutely.
down.
Yes, it does.
And the ladies are walking around in dresses and they look like bridesmaids.
Yes. Now, and then was it in Arua that you also experienced that many of the ladies didn't wear anything covering their top? I mean, did you know that when you left that you would you see pictures on National Geographic
Yeah,
and everything, but did you know that you were going to find that when you arrived?
Well, I knew it was a distinct possibility.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I would be expected to join in.
Oh.
But I knew it was a possibility.
Well, I know you were expected to join in on a lot of things, that's for sure. This is the Jacqueline Bachar Show, and I'm talking to author Eve Brown-Waite about her book, First Comes Love, Then Comes Malaria, a memoir from Broadway Books about her life in the Peace Corps. So, Eve, let's get into some of the specifics now of your setting up house. You fought the idea of hiring servants. You met a lot of expats there, and they were certainly very supportive and very friendly. But the idea of hiring servants, like they all had, you felt was a concept of leftover colonialism, which you fought. But you soon learned why you should have them. Now, tell us about your early experiences without them and why you finally gave in.
Well, I had come from a Peace Corps mentality. Peace Corps, we like to think of ourselves as a little bit rough and tough, and we do it ourselves. And then here I was expected to have, as you say, servants. And I thought, I can't go there. And besides, I figured out pretty quickly I was not going to have a regular job. What else was I going to do but cook my food and clean my house? And so that's what I tried to do for a while. But I forgot to factor into the equation that absolutely everything had to be done by hand, from scratch. I would have to shop in markets where nothing was refrigerated, nothing was preserved.
Half of which you didn't know what it was, right?
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to cook it. I was going to have to, I didn't have to butcher my own meat, but everything after that I had to do. Fillet the fish and gut the chicken and clean the rocks out of the rice. And pretty quickly I figured out this is just too much for me to do. And I hired a series of housekeepers until I found the right one.
But also, in your hiring them, you were actually helping them economically, even though the wages certainly weren't high. They expected that you were to have a servant. It just didn't seem right that you didn't have it.
Exactly.
And you were helping them earn money, which they needed very badly.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about the two little creatures that you brought with you, Beijing and Berlin.
Oh, our cats. We took our cats, Berlin and Beijing. We didn't have kids at the time. We had our cats. And they lived with us in Brooklyn, and I just couldn't imagine leaving them behind. So they came with us.
And
everybody thought we were nuts.
I was going to say, how did the locals react to that? I mean, did they think you were bringing it as food, or?
Well, I wouldn't have been surprised if they thought that, but no one let on. Ugandans, as a whole, my experience has always been, they are so gracious and so hospitable and so welcoming. And as soon as they learned we had cats with us and they were our pets, nobody batted an eyelash. They said, of course you would bring your pets. You love them, and they are welcome here. And all of our friends and neighbors and everybody did everything they could to help us look after our cats.
I believe it was UNICEF that invited you to a 3-day conference with community educators, young women, many of whom had the disease. So, and then you also gave a lecture to HIV educators. I was struck by their reaction to you, and I'd like you to talk briefly about you learned from these two events. I think it lets people know the difficulty in AIDS education and dealing with this terrible disease?
Well, the reaction was always across the board. People would be incredibly welcoming. They would treat me as if I was an honored guest, put me up in the front of the room, have me say a few words, and then nothing would really change. Nobody would really do a whole lot people's behaviors weren't changing. There was a lot of talk about doing HIV prevention, a lot of conferences, a lot of meetings, but not a lot was actually happening on the ground. So it was incredibly frustrating. So it was just, again, a lot of frustration. And most of the frustration I found was on the parts of the agencies. As you said, UNICEF would love to have me go to their conferences, but they wouldn't want to hire me to actually do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost as if everybody goes to conferences and talks about it, then you don't even really have to do anything. So nothing actually trickled down. It was incredibly frustrating. And I found that also from the local AIDS educators, too, who would come and say, oh, yeah, they don't really expect us to do anything. We just come to meetings. Nobody really expects us to do anything.
Well, and when you sat there and had these little conversations with these gals, they did ask many questions, and you would answer them, and then they also, it was their culture and their look at sexual relationships that also added to the equation. They just thought some of the things that they were being told was kind of silly. They had to do what they were doing.
Yeah. They educated me more than I think I ever educated them. Mm-hmm. Because I came from an American background with my wonderful graduate degree, but it was from an American university. And those things aren't necessarily applicable in other parts of the world. Things were really different in Uganda. Women didn't have choices as we have here. They couldn't necessarily protect themselves. So I really had to learn all over again. A lot of the things that I thought I knew from the United States, I had to learn all over again in Uganda and try and figure out how could I really help people based on their reality, not mine.
But you really liked the women that you met, and you established a nice little relationship with them, and they gave you a special name.
Oh, they did.
Tell us what the name, what is your name that they gave you, and what does it mean?
My Lugbara name, which is the tribe, I lived among the Lugbara people up in northwest Uganda. And after one of these conferences, they gave me a gift, and that was my name. And they named me Ayikaru, which means joyful. And it was just a beautiful little ceremony. They sang to me. They joined their hands with mine, and they named me Joyful, Ayikaru.
That must have been a wonderful experience for you.
It was an amazing experience, and it happened pretty early on in my stay. So it sort of started to help me feel welcomed and at home, and like I just might be able to survive here.
Yes,
so that was nice.
And the fact that they honored you in this way seems to me that they were getting something from you in return.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, unless it's part of their culture, to go around naming people like that. I got the feeling in reading that particular section that they really did like you.
And that was what was so surprising to me, because I had come to this conference, and I just spent a day, and I didn't really do very much at all. I taught them a game to play, which was an HIV education game. But that was really it. And back in the United States, I was used to leading workshops that would go on for days and writing manuals and doing so much more. And here all I did is I spent the day with them, and for 45 minutes I led an activity. And they were so grateful for that and felt that I had contributed so much that they honored me by giving me that name. And you're right, they don't do that for everybody. I don't think my husband ever got a name.
Well, that's really something. Well, you went on to have a lot of experiences in Arua, and I'm going to ask you just to talk about some of the curious experiences that you had. Again, we really want people to read the book, and there are so many things that you did go through. But could you tell us a couple of stories about your experiences, whether it's about shopping in the market or some of the more unpleasant experiences, or just give us a little idea of what everyday life was like there for you?
Well, all right, let me give you a little story without giving away too much.
Right.
Am I allowed to give away? Oh, I don't know. Is this giving away too much? Does everybody know I had a baby there?
Well, we're certainly going to talk about that. But before we get to that point, even before that, you were having some funny, curious, strange experiences just in going to the market and some of the people that you met and the attitudes.
And people offering me, I'm going through the market and people are offering me, Madame, would you like termites? No, I don't think so. I'm not quite sure how to cook them.
But they ate them, didn't they?
They certainly did, as did we by the end of our stay there.
And it's plenty of protein, I guess.
Yes, there are a lot of protein, and you'd be surprised they don't taste bad.
Somehow I don't think I'm going to have that for lunch today.
So that would be interesting. And of course, every time I went to the bazaar, to the market, it was a big deal. It was almost like you were a rock star just by being a Mzungu, which is a white person. It was very funny because you were no longer anonymous. So every time I'd walk into the market, everybody would greet me. They would all learn my name. Well, hello, Madame. Hello, Madame Eve. Would you like this? Would you like this? How is your husband? People were just very, very kind and generous to me and would help me with things and give me their advice about which papaya was ready and if somebody was charging me too much, for the matoke, they would talk them down. So that was all just, every day was an adventure, really.
And you also learned about the hierarchy of authority in the village as well. The people, the men in particular, that had positions that they wanted to hang on to and wouldn't even walk somewhere if you didn't have a ride to give them.
That was my frustration.
Yes.
I spent a lot of time with the district health educator because I wanted to do something. And they didn't have to pay me. I would volunteer. It didn't matter. I just wanted to be useful and have something to do and feel like I'd contributed. So I met the district health educator very early on. He was thrilled to have me and very welcoming. And I would go day after day to his office, and we would drink tea and eat ground nuts, and we would never do anything else. We would talk about, we could go to this school, we could go to that school, we can talk about this, we can give workshops, but it never happened.
It never happened, that's right.
And the reason it never happened, in many of these schools we could have walked to, but it never happened because we didn't have a vehicle. He would say to me, we don't have a vehicle, Madame, so we can't go. And I would say, but we could walk. There's a school right there. I can see it. And he laughed at me.
Yes.
Important people like us, we do not walk. We cannot be seen walking.
Well, and during this time, I want to get to what you raised, that you're hoping to get pregnant, and when you think you are, you have a strange, frustrating, dark comedy visit with a doctor.
Nobody could tell me whether or not I was pregnant.
Well, that whole description is so incredible. It's worth getting the book just to read that. But you went on and on and on with that. And then you were getting sicker and sicker and thinking that this was all due to, well, you must be pregnant.
Yeah.
And it turned out that's when you got malaria.
Oh, I got malaria and dysentery
at the same time.
And I was pregnant.
And you were pregnant. And I went, hooray, she's pregnant.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, this is the Jacqueline Bachar Show, and I'm talking to author Eve Brown-Waite about her book, First Comes Love, Then Comes Malaria, a memoir about her life in the Peace Corps from Broadway Books. So you're pregnant, have malaria, are unable to bathe and eat as you'd like to, and learning to deal with the rhythm of Arua and sudden happenings. And you were also trying to learn, I think, how to wear the native dress, which turned out to be a little trickier than that. But you finally get through that okay. But at 7 months pregnant, a decision is reached that you should finish your pregnancy back in the States, which you do.
Yeah.
So
there was no way I was going to give birth. Remember, we didn't have reliable electricity or running water.
Yes.
This was my first baby.
And you were expected to leave by about your 7th month, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
7 months.
So the people in charge of you wanted you to do that then.
Yeah.
So John arrives during your 9th month, and what happens? Who arrives?
Well, first we got back to America, which was tremendously joyful to be reunited with Ben and Jerry and all the yummy food and electricity. But also we had some culture shock because it was just so different. And then, at 9 months after, I was done being pregnant, my daughter was born. Her name is Sierra Rose.
And I love the name.
Oh, thank you. And she was just lovely and perfect and healthy. All the concerns we had about having malaria and dysentery, she was absolutely perfect. And then we brought her back to Uganda when she was 5 weeks old.
5 weeks, that's right. So what was life like for you now in Arua with the baby of this age? What was the reaction from the people, and what are some of the things that happened?
You know, coming back with a baby in so many ways made everything easier. My neighbors finally understood me. I had a baby, and most of the time she was attached to my boob. I was breastfeeding full time, and they understood that. When I was a woman who didn't have a child, and all I did was I had this big house, and I didn't have any children to look after. They just didn't know what to make of me.
Yes, the locals you're talking about.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Because all Ugandan women of childbearing age have children. That's it. And so once I had a baby, I made sense to them. And it was interesting because I just think it was easier to get into the community. When I showed up somewhere with the baby on my back or the baby on my breast, I would just be welcomed right next to all the other mothers. Mm-hmm. And I would sit down, and whatever they did with their babies, I would do the same. And it was really nice. It made life in a lot of ways easier for me.
And one of the first things that they helped you learn was to tie this wrap around the baby that you then tied around you. I can't figure out how you do that. Could you explain what it's called? And
Well, there's a piece of material. It's everywhere in Uganda. It's called a kitenge, and it's just an unhemmed length of cloth. Usually beautiful. They have lots of them. Beautiful, beautiful cloths. And the women wear them. They use them for every purpose. You wrap them around you like a skirt. You wrap it over whatever else you're wearing to keep the dust off. And you can wrap it, you can tie it with your baby over your breasts. You tie it under, you tie it over, and the baby straddles on your back, and somehow it's like a baby carrier. And they did try. Regina was my housekeeper. She tried desperately to teach me how to do it. But I was never really that good at doing it unless she helped me.
Well, I was thinking of, trying to sling the baby onto your back while you're doing it.
And Madame, you fling the baby over your back, really?
Well, after a while, you got into all of that, but things do start happening now in Arua, and some dangerous events occur, and after some particularly bad ones, care insists that it's too dangerous for your family to stay. And what was it like during this period of making your goodbyes and preparing to leave?
Well, what precipitated that was a period of a lot of fear. All kinds of things were happening. Civil war was raging, and bombs were being dropped, and there was a lot of things happening. And we had a friend get shot, and another friend die in a motorcycle accident. So it was very, very, very sad when it came time to leave. It was heartbreaking. But there was no question that it was time to leave because we had just been living in fear for so many months. And now it wasn't just John and I. We had a baby also, so... It was heartbreaking, and it was sad, and it was bittersweet though, because I really did grow to love Arua.
Well, it's just a great book, and we're almost out of time here, but I do want to say that at the end of the book, John has been given a position in Uzbekistan, and I assume that another memoir is forthcoming about your life there. Is that correct?
I think so.
Well, Eve...
I'm working on it, yes.
I'll tell you, I've enjoyed this one so much, I'm sure I'll enjoy the next one, and when it's out, I hope you will come back to my show.
Oh, I would love to.
I wish we had more time because it's just a very unique book, and I thank you so much for being here, and I'll make sure that I'm on your list to get you back here during that next book.
Oh, well, thank you, Jacqueline. It was my great pleasure.
Well, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Be well. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.